Welcome everyone. I'm going to talk about two of the most well-known quantum algorithms, which are Shor's and Grover's algorithms. But first, I'm going to start talking about quantum phase estimation because it is a key algorithm in both Shor's and Grover's algorithms. The idea here is that we have a certain unitary gate of which we know its eigenstates, and since it is a unitary, the eigenstates are going to have their corresponding eigenvalues, which are just complex phases. And the goal with this algorithm is to, given a certain eigenstate, to estimate its corresponding eigenphase, which again is going to be a phase which is going to be between 0 and 1. This is the circuit of quantum phase estimation, which I'm going to explain in detail in a minute. But first, briefly, this is the notation I'm going to follow in this talk. I'm going to use regular subindexes to refer to the size of a certain quantum register, and I'm going to use brackets with a certain subindex to index a particular qubit in a register, and I'm going to follow the same notation with regular integers to index a particular bit. So this was the circuit of quantum phase estimation. This is the first half, and here the point is to first, in the top register, because there are two registers, to apply a Hadamard to each qubit to transform it into uniform superposition, and then we apply powers of the unitary, powers of 2, u to the 1, u to the 2, u to the 4, each one controlled by each of the qubits of the top register. Why do we do this? Well, the goal is to transform the top register into the following shape. This shape might be familiar because it is the result of applying, it is similar to applying a QFT to a regular basis state. And this is why afterwards we follow this part of the algorithm with an inverse QFT, because the result is going to be something close to a pure state, which represents the following integer 2 to the m times the phase as an m-bit integer. It is not going to be exactly a pure state because it would be only a pure state if that number was exactly an integer and then this was exactly like undo in a QFT, which would be this third case of these simple plots I've made to showcase how quantum phase estimation works. But in general, this is not going to be an integer, but still, even though it is not a pure state, the most likely state to measure is going to encode the closest m-bit integer to this value 2 to the m times the phase, which are these two cases. In other words, this allows us to confidently, with good probability, to extract the phase of a given eigenstate. In particular, one doesn't have to initialize the register with a single eigenstate, but instead can do it with a superposition of several eigenstates of the unitary. And in that case, the result is going to be similar, but the most likely values to measure are going to be the closest integers to the different phase numbers, to the different 2 to the m times the phase. That's a mistake, you should put phi in this. So it is the same idea, but with several eigenstates and several eigenvalues. So if you don't care which one to measure, this is a good idea. In particular, these two plots are from applying the quantum phase estimation to Shor's algorithm, which I'm going to discuss later. And again, this is the idea. The most likely values to measure are the closest integers to something from which we can extract the phase. This is the idea of quantum phase estimation. However, we can improve on this, because we can make improvements on the QFT or on the inverse QFT. This is just a simple inverse QFT in the 4-qubit case, followed by an immediate measurement. You might notice that in the first qubit, the one down here, it only has a Hadamard gate, so it doesn't have any gates which depend on the qubits above. So it could be run separately without depending on the other qubits. For the second qubit, it is a similar case, because even though it has a phase gate which depends on this first qubit, if we happen to run the Hadamard on this initial qubit aside from the others, it can be shown that we could run the second qubit and this phase would only depend on the measured value on this first qubit. I'm going to show in a circuit in a minute to understand this idea better. The goal here is that this can be applied to all the qubits, and in the end, we could simplify this combination of a QFT or an inverse QFT plus a measurement as a single qubit, which is in which you apply the gates for the first qubit, you make a measurement, you reset the qubit, you do the same thing for the next qubit, which would only depend on the measured values of the previously run qubits. So we are transforming a combo of a QFT plus a measurement into a circuit which has only a single qubit and gates conditioned on the previous measurements. This is the idea of the semi-classical QFT, or again, it can be applied to the inverse QFT. And applying this trick to the quantum phase estimation I've introduced before, we transform it into iterative phase estimation, in which we are splitting the algorithm of quantum phase estimation into several cycles, which as many cycles as the number of qubits we had in the top register. And in each qubit, we're going to measure one of the bits of the result, and all the phases in each cycle are only going to depend on the previously measured qubits from the previous cycles. So this is the idea of iterative phase estimation, which allows us to sometimes dramatically reduce the number of qubits.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
The QFT.
Yeah, sure.
Measurements. So, the protocol that you are saying that's based on this measurement within the cycles and so on.
Yes.
Gives the exact same result as the QFT, or this classical QFTs giving different results is going to be used to quantum measure in the end.
It is the same idea. It can, I mean, this step in which I explained that this conditional phase can be reinterpreted or rewritten as a phase condition on the previous measurement is the same idea. It is essentially transforming the QFT plus a measurement into a different thing, but the result is the same. Okay, so again, this is a very important improvement on quantum phase estimation. And now I'm moving into Grover's algorithm after having explained phase estimation. Our task here is to search elements and to use a quantum computer to do so. So I'm going to already start in a quantum system, which is going to be of n qubits, and thus we have 2 to the n basis states. Out of those n basis states, there's going to be m so-called target states which we want to search. And in order to identify them, we're going to have as an input a certain oracle gate, which can be constructed in several ways, but the action it performs is that for target states, it is going to flip their amplitude if the gate is applied to them. And for non-target states, it is going to do nothing. So that way, it is going to act differently on target and non-target states. And our goal is, given this input, to be able to search those target states. In other words, to transform the circuit into something where if we make a measurement, we're going to confidently measure a target state. So the way to do, well, first of all, we're going to define conveniently some superpositions. This is the superposition of all the states, target and non-target. And then these two are the superpositions separately of target and non-target states. Since we are essentially splitting the entire space of the quantum system in two sets of elements, which they share no common elements, these two states are orthogonal, and in particular, we can rewrite this general superposition as a linear combination of these two. And essentially, what we are doing here is that we are working on a particular subspace, which is the subspace spanned by these two vectors, alpha and beta. In particular, applications of the oracle gate O are going to rotate states with respect to alpha. In other words, if we apply the oracle to states which are in this subspace, the result is also going to be in this subspace. So far, we are working on this particular subspace. Seeing this, the idea would be to rotate a certain state to get us close to beta, because I haven't mentioned it, but since this is a subspace spanned by two vectors, it has a very simple representation on the 2D plane and as the unit sphere. So this way, our goal would be to rotate the state as close as possible to get to beta. But just with the oracle, we cannot do it. However, we can conveniently define, well, as I mentioned, this is the goal, we can conveniently define an operator which is the diffusion operator, which can be constructed from this superposition of all the states, which is something we can construct without knowing target states. And this particular gate is going to rotate the states with respect to this vector psi0. In other words, it is also working on this subspace. And from here, we can conveniently combine these two gates that we have to construct the Grover operator, or also called the Grover iteration, in which we first apply the oracle to a given state, and then we immediately apply the diffusion operator. If our initial state, which is psi0, has a particular angle with respect to alpha, then applications of this particular operator to any state in the subspace is going to rotate them anticlockwise with a particular angle of 2 theta. However, you might notice that to somehow calculate or to know this angle, it depends on both n and m. And, well, first of all, by this technique of rotating a fixed amount of degrees for any vector, this gives us a possibility to rotate and get as close to beta. But as I was mentioning, measuring theta, to know theta, we will need both n and m. However, in general, m might be an unknown variable. Sometimes we could know the number of target states without knowing them, which of them are particularly target states, but in general, we might not know it. So the solution, and now we come back to the start of the talk, is to use quantum phase estimation, because conveniently in this subspace, the Grover operator G has the following two eigenstates, which have the following two eigenvalues, in which we have directly theta. And therefore, applying the quantum phase estimation to this Grover operator G could help us extract theta, and from there we could compute M. This is usually called the counting problem, in which we are counting the number of target states in this system. As I mentioned before, this can be done with the regular quantum phase estimation, and this can also be done with the iterative quantum phase estimation, in which we split it into cycles. And the result is going to be that when we make measurements in each of the cycles, we're going to measure a number which is going to be approximately 2 to the m times the phase divided by pi. And from here, by making a reasonable measurement with a reasonable amount of qubits, or in this case with a reasonable amount of cycles, we could extract theta, and from theta extract m. This is the idea of the counting problem. However, going back to the idea of Grover's algorithm, it can be interpreted from a different point of view. If we take any element in the entire subspace, in the entire space, not in the particular subspace I was talking before, it is going to be a generic linear combination of all the basis states, and it can be shown that the application of the diffusion operator to any arbitrary state results in the corresponding expression, in which we are essentially flipping each amplitude with respect to the mean of all the amplitudes. In other words, if one of those amplitudes is the average amplitude plus something, we're transforming it into the opposite, into that amplitude minus something, which is the idea of, again, reflecting with respect to the mean. And this idea, I'm going to illustrate it in the example I've represented in a second, but this is another interpretation of the same idea of rotating the initial state until we get close to beta. Briefly, we still need to discuss the number of rotations which are required. A nice upper bound for this amount of rotations is the following, and here you might notice that the number of rotations is essentially the number of Grover iterations we're making. And since the circuit, besides from some constant number of gates, is going to be essentially a certain number of these Grover rotations, then the size of the circuit is going to be related to the amount of rotations. It's going to be of order of the square root of n. And since classical searching, in which you have to go through each element by checking if the element is target or not, is of the order of the number of elements, and in fact it requires on average half of the elements until we find a target element, this shows how Grover's searching algorithm provides an improvement with respect to classical searching. And now I'm going to show a particular example. Here I have the entire space is composed of 50 elements, and 4 of them, these last 4 green of them, are the target states. This is the initial state in which all the amplitudes are the same. It is a regular superposition, so the mean is just 1 over the square root of n. Applying a certain Grover operator means first applying the oracle gate, in which these 4 amplitudes become negative, and therefore the average of all the amplitudes gets lowered. And then by applying the diffusion operator, this is going to transform the amplitudes so that the 4 target amplitudes are going to get amplified and the other ones are going to get reduced. And the same idea can be seen as our initial state rotating this to theta angle, which is the following application. This is after applying a rotation. As I mentioned, target states are amplified, the other ones are reduced, and our state rotates. We can apply it a second time, and this is the ideal number of rotations to apply, because this is the closest we can get to beta. And as you can see, if we made a measurement in the system right now with a very good guarantee, we would almost likely measure a target state. We could keep making rotations, but that wouldn't be ideal, because now we would get too far from beta, and therefore the other amplitudes would start getting big again. And the same if we applied another extra rotation. So this is the idea of Grover's algorithm. Now I'm going to move into source algorithm. In source algorithm, the main problem we have is factoring a certain number. We are given a certain natural number, which we know is the product of two numbers p and q, and our task is to obtain those two numbers p and q. You might notice that the opposite problem is something trivial. Given p and q, you multiply it and you get n. However, the factoring problem is notoriously hard to compute. In general, there are several algorithms to compute it, and one of them, the one I'm going to discuss here, is source algorithm, but none of them are classically efficient. And now I'm going to proceed to explain where source algorithm comes from. The base on source algorithm is some group theory and modular arithmetic. And the idea is simple. First, for any natural number, we can construct a group by taking the set of all the numbers, including 1 and all numbers smaller than n and which are coprime to n. In other words, 1 and all the numbers smaller and which have no factors in common with n. And that set of numbers, along with the operation of modular multiplication with modulo n multiplication, constructs a finite group which I'm calling Gn. And since this is a finite group, it immediately follows that every element is going to have an order. The order is the smallest integer, so that by applying repeated multiplications of the modulo n multiplication by a, we're going to eventually get to the element 1. In other words, this is the idea behind the periodicity on this kind of groups and on modular multiplication. This is a particular example for n equals 15, which has the following set of elements in the group. These are some simple modular multiplications to show how the procedure works. And here is a simple diagram which shows how the idea of the periodicity works. For the particular element a equals 7, the actual order is r equals 4, which means that if you start multiplying by 7 modulo n, then the result again multiplied by 7 modulo n, you're going to eventually get back to 1 and repeat the loop. And in this case, since the order is 4, it means that it is going to take 4 multiplications to repeat that loop. This is the idea of the periodicity behind modular multiplication. So how can we use this to factor a number? Well, we are going to use this group with our input number n, and we can play with the expression of the order. We can rearrange this expression by supposing that r is an even number, because if r is an even number, we can split this expression and we get the following congruency, which essentially means that n is going to be a factor in this entire expression composed by these two factors. Now we need to study when this expression is true, because there are two trivial cases and then the non-trivial case. The trivial cases are important to distinguish because they give us no information about n. The first trivial case would be that the number n is entirely contained as a factor in this single parenthesis. This is one of the two trivial cases. However, this particular trivial case cannot happen because since r is the smallest integer which satisfies this expression, r over 2 cannot satisfy it. But the second trivial case could happen. So it is going to be something to take into account later. The most interesting case is the non-trivial case, because if n is not individually contained in this factor or in this other parenthesis, then n must be contained together in the entire number. And therefore, p and q must be separately contained in these two factors, which means that by applying the greatest common divisor, we can extract the factors from this expression. And this is how we can factor a number using this mathematical background. So from this idea, we can construct the actual procedure to factor a number. First, we choose an integer a between the bounds of 2 and n minus 1. Then we need to check that a is in the group, because if a is not in the group, it means that it shares a factor with n, so extracting the factors is trivial. So now that we know that a is in the group, then we need to find the order of a. After we find the order of a, we need to check if the two assumptions hold, that r is even and that particular trivial case is not true. And if those two are fine, then we can extract the factors p and q. So this is the idea of source algorithm. However, one might wonder, why is this not efficient? Well, all the steps happen to be classically efficient except for the order finding part. And that is when we have to rely on quantum computing to find the solution. In particular, our goal is to find a quantum algorithm which helps us, given n and a particular element in the group A, to extract the order r, at least with a reasonable probability. So the idea is to discuss the quantum order finding algorithm. Or it is also called the quantum period finding algorithm. Period and order are the same thing. So how does this algorithm work? Well, the idea is simple. It is just to apply quantum phase estimation where the unitary performs modular multiplication with by a modulo n. This is going to be the idea. Why do we use this particular unitary? Because it can be, one can see that these are the particular eigenstates and eigenvalues of this unitary. There are R of them, which I am indexing with this value S, and the phases we would extract by performing quantum phase estimation would be those fractions S over R. However, you might notice that we cannot really prepare a pure eigenstate in the quantum register because we will need to know R to prepare such a register. So the solution is to, as I mentioned before, to use quantum phase estimation with a superposition of eigenstates because luckily the regular number 1 represented as a basis state happens to be a superposition of all the eigenstates if you add all of them. Yeah.
So that unitary, could you have like simple division? Why is that an invertible operation?
It is not going to be immediately invertible. You're going to see that when I later discuss a particular implementation of the unitary, because we're going to require ancillary qubits to make it work, because by itself, modular multiplication is not invertible. So you cannot just make such a unitary without any ancillary qubits, because as you mentioned, it will not be invertible.
Okay, so it's not a unitary yet.
Not yet, because later, as I mentioned, when I'm going to construct it, we're going to require ancillary qubits to make it, to reasonably make it. Okay, so again, by applying quantum phase estimation, we're going to estimate a value which is going to be 2 to the m times the phase. In particular, we can make use of two interesting properties of modular arithmetic that simplify constructing the phase estimation. Because it can be shown that applying the unitary with respect to a k times is the same as applying the unitary with a raised to the power of k by modular multiplication properties. And applying the unitary with respect to a number a is the same as applying the unitary with respect to the number a modulo n, which is going to help us work with way smaller numbers because raising a to the powers of 2 is quickly going to get very big. So these are going to become very handy later. This is essentially the circuit, quantum phase estimation with the unitary I mentioned and with the number 1 as the eigenstate register. And from there, we extract the number I mentioned. This is a particular nice case for n equals 15 and a equals 13, in which the value is exactly an integer. And in general, we are going to get two possible measurements. Y could be exactly the phase, which is this case, or the closest integer in other not that nice cases. But we could also make a bad measurement because of not measuring the closest integer or because of noise. But the real problem we still have to deal with is that we are only measuring a fraction, S over R, but we do not know S nor R, so how can we get R from such a fraction? We only know the ratio. So the solution is going to come from applying another branch of mathematics, which is the theory of continued fractions. In particular, we have a fraction, a rational number, which is going to be smaller than 1. Remember that the phase is between 0 and 1. So we can represent it as a finite sequence of continued fractions, which is a finite list of coefficients. From this idea of continued fractions, we can define the convergents, which are essentially truncated versions of the continued fraction. We're going to have several of them for a particular value. And here is when the key theorem for extracting R comes to us. Given this continued fractions expansion of our measured value, then the convergent whose corresponding fraction has the smallest denominator, sorry, the biggest denominator, and the denominator is smaller than n, then it will be precisely our fraction S over R with a lower bound, which is a reasonable probability, if this bizarre condition is met. Luckily, one can show that to satisfy this condition is enough to take the top register of the quantum phase estimation and the required qubit count or the required cycle count if we are making the iterative phase estimation has to be greater or equal than twice the bit size of our input number n. So this already fixes us the size of the top register. The qubit count of the bottom register is going to depend on the implementation of our unitary gate.
Question.
Yes?
Where does that probability come from?
Oh, it is a tough demonstration. I couldn't be able to.
So you compute that continuous fraction expansion,
Yes.
and now you take from those the biggest Z prime.
I'm going to show an example in a minute. Is the next slide. So you can. This is as I mentioned, a simple example to understand this idea better. N equals 21 for the value A equals 4, and therefore the bit sizes would be N equals 5 and M equals 10, and the real order is R equals 3, so let's see if the theorem actually gives us the right value. If we run the quantum period finding algorithm, we would, for example, measure a value of 683. So the fraction is the following fraction. From there, we can compute the continued fractions coefficients, and then we have three possible convergents, which are the following, and they correspond to the following fraction if you undo the conversion and get back to the fraction. So as you can see, the last convergent, which is the fraction itself, has a too big denominator. So the theorem would suggest that the right convergent from which to estimate S over R would be the second one. And indeed, it gives us the correct values of S and R. This is a particularly nice example.
Okay, so it's the probability among the choices that you have from all the fractions that could be the right description of your S.
Yes. Yes. But still, this is a nice example, so we have to discuss the possible bad results. First of all, it is the y equals 0 measurement. As I've shown before, the eigenvalue for S equals 0 is always present, can always be measured. And as you can see from this value, we cannot retrieve anything because we cannot compute the fraction or anything. Then, of course, we have the problem of making a bad measurement, which is not the closest integer, and therefore the theorem would not really apply because it is not a good measurement. And another subtle problem, which might not be immediately obvious, is when S over R is not an irreducible fraction. This is a simple example. For n equals 15 and the value A equals 2, the real order would be R equals 4. So if we happen to make a measurement in quantum period finding, and the value we measured corresponded to the eigenvalue of S equals 2, then the fraction simplifies. And if we run the continued fractions post-processing procedure, it would yield us a false positive, telling us that R should be 2. This is a problem, but still we can make use of it because the false positive is always going to be a factor of R because it is just simplifying a factor or several factors. So a way to make use of these false positives is to repeat the QPF procedure several times, and in case we are too unlucky to never measure a good value of R, we would have compiled several false positives, and maybe the combined false positives happen to combine to the right factors of R, and by taking the least common multiple of all of them, we might be able to get the correct value of R. So this is a way to take advantage of a priori bad result. Now I'm going to discuss the implementation of the unitary for quantum period finding. The procedure I'm going to follow is that first we're going to start constructing a simple gate which just adds a number, then the same for modular addition, and finally we're going to go to modular multiplication, a step-by-step procedure. There are several ways to construct the unitary. I'm going to follow a particular one to show us an example. And in fact, for this first idea, the other gate, as I was mentioning, the idea is that to a quantum state which has a number encoded in bits as a basis state, as before, the idea is to add to that value a constant number which is known already. There are several ways to do such an addition, and one of the ways I'm going to follow here is the circuit by Draper, which is the following circuit. Note that here I am denoting this as if they were control phases, but in reality this is a classical number. So this, when they are preparing the circuit, when they are prepared immediately, so the resulting circuit is going to be this below, and thus the phases are or are not present. They are not really controlled by a qubit. So the idea with this circuit is that it works on Fourier space, so this is not immediately another. We would have to take our input register, apply the QFT, apply the other, and then undo the QFT to actually get the resulting value. These are the following phases in the circuit. The size, as you might see, is about n squared, but then you might notice that the gates, that the phases, all the P1s can all be run simultaneously because each one runs on a separate qubit, then the same for P2, P3, and so on. So the depth is actually O of n. And an important note, if we were to make addition of n-bit numbers with this gate, we would really need n+1 qubits to be safe of possible overflows, of adding numbers which are too big or maybe applying an inverse add and we would get a negative number. In those cases, we would really need an extra qubit to be safe from overflows. Now we move to modular addition. We construct this gate from the previous addition, and the idea is similar to before, but now we are taking the number x, we are adding a constant known number a modulo n. The implementation I'm going to follow is the one discussed by Burgard, which is the following circuit, and it essentially consists on two parts. I'm going to discuss them now. First, the requirements. It requires that both x and a are smaller than n, so that this modular procedure simplifies a lot, because for a generic number it would be a bit complicated to make a modular addition, to make the modulo n part. But if we follow these requirements, then it is a matter of maybe subtracting n only if it is necessary, which is why the circuit is not terribly big. The first half of the circuit is essentially getting to actually compute x plus a modulo n. So first, we have a, which is the first gate, then we subtract n, but subtracting n may or may not be necessary, because if a plus x is smaller than n, that we would get a negative number. In that case, we didn't really need to subtract n. But we can check if that was needed by checking the ancillary qubit, no, the top qubit in the top register, which we needed before for the overflow case. And by checking that qubit, if it was set, because it would be set if the subtraction was negative, and storing the result as if it were a Boolean bit, as if it were a Boolean, on an ancillary qubit, we can then later conditionally add n back again, conditioned on the ancillary qubit. So essentially, it is a way of knowing if the subtraction was needed and adding n back again if it wasn't really needed. So this first half of the circuit essentially gets us to the result. But still, the ancillary qubit now might be on an arbitrary state, 0 or 1, depending on if there was overflow or not. And it is very convenient for us to get the ancillary qubit back to 0. So that is on what the second half of the circuit essentially consists on, which is this second part. Here we use the following property, which essentially translates onto the idea that this first n subtraction and now making another subtraction of a are mutually exclusive in a certain way, in the sense that if this first subtraction was negative, then now subtracting a will be positive, and vice versa. And by combining these two properties, as you can see here in the box, and combining them into the ancillary qubit as if we were combining booleans, we can essentially use them to reset the ancillary qubit back to 0. So this is the idea of the modular addition and how we can properly transform the ancillary as well. And another mention, it also still works on Fourier space, which I denoted with this tilde notation, because if we could make a non-Fourier space version by applying QFTs and inverse QFTs at the start and the end, but since we are going to apply modular additions, several of them followed by another modular additions, it is convenient to just leave them this way. And now from here we move to modular multiplication. In this case, the application is is easier to get, because we are essentially transforming the product of a times x into several sums conditioned by each of the bits of x, which is the following idea. This implementation is also by Burgard, and one can also check that this idea of splitting the product of a times x modulo n into several additions, here as you can see by a multiplied by power of 2, and then those additions being controlled by the bits of the number x, which here we are using an extra register to encode that value, and one can check that that also holds for modular addition and not just for regular addition. The requirements come from the previous gates, that x and a are smaller than n, and that this register in which we are applying the additions requires an extra qubit, but since in the top register we are not making any additions, we can just use n qubits. It is not really a problem. This would be technically our target our target gate for quantum period finding. But the problem is that, as you can see, the result is stored in the second register, and our idea is to apply this sequentially. Remember the sequential application in the quantum phase estimation. So our goal would be for the result to be stored in the top qubit. So this is not really what we need. So for that reason, we need to transform this gate into an in-place version so that the result is actually stored in the top register. The way we do this is by first applying the regular product, then swapping the n bits we are interested in, but then, as you can see in this step, in the second register we would not have 0, which again we need the ancillary qubits to be 0 again so that we can apply this sequentially and the ancillary qubits always start as 0. We need to get rid of this x value, and the trick to do that is to apply an inverse modular multiplication where the value is the inverse of A, where this inverse of A is with respect to the group G of n, and that way you can see here that the application of that inverse modular product is going to simplify, and we're going to essentially get 0 in that second register. Note that by this point, both these two n plus 1 qubit and 1 single qubit registers are both ancillary qubits. And here, these are the size and the depth values. It got increased because of the previous applications of several sequential additions. We got another power of n because of that. We are not applying a constant number of gates. And this is the unitary we wanted. Now, this particular implementation of quantum period finding is going to be essentially applying quantum phase estimation with this unitary that we got. Again, as I was mentioning before, we need extra ancillary qubits so that we can make this really a proper gate, despite the modular multiplication operation not being really invertible. So this is the idea. Since we are applying or the order of n products, size and depth also get increased another power, and this particular implementation ends up taking 4n plus 2 qubits, where n is the bit size of our input number. In this quantum phase estimation procedure, we are measuring again a power of 2 times the phase, and the extraction of R is, as I mentioned before, by post-processing. If we take advantage of iterative phase estimation, we reduce the size of this particular implementation to 2n plus 3 qubits, and we are again splitting the circuit into 2n cycles. The idea is the same. The size gets an improvement because of particular properties of the semi-classical QFT, and again the procedure is the same, extracting R through post-processing. This is the idea. Now I'm going to discuss a particular improvement that can be made to the base algorithm. Remember that back when I started, I mentioned that we were supposing that the order was even in order to make this factorization. However, you might notice that if the element A happens to be, for example, a square number, we do not really need for R to be even to factor the expression, which looks convenient. We might take advantage of order values this way. But one needs to take notice because now this second trivial case, which before couldn't happen, now might happen, because B, which is also going to be an element in the group, could have an order which is smaller than R. R is the order of A. So now both trivial cases could happen. This idea can be more generalized in the sense that if A happens to be a power with the lowest root being B, it can be shown that factoring with the root instead of factoring with the value of A is similar, and in a few cases it can be even better. So in general, it is desirable to check if a given element is a power to reduce it to the lowest root and to actually factor using the root. This is a simple example to show the idea. If we happen to factor with n equals 21 and n equals 16, first of all, regular procedure would fail because the order is odd. If we allowed odd orders and we took the square root and got the immediate root, which is 4, it would also fail because now a trivial case is not satisfied, so it cannot really factor. But if we go to the lowest root, which is the element 2, the factoring is successful. And I'm going to show that in a minute because it is one of the last examples I have. Finally, let's go with a few examples. N equals 21, and for example, we decide to test with A equals 5. In regular procedure, source algorithm, we pick an element A. This would be the probabilities of the quantum period finding application, and let's say that we measure 853. In that case, by applying post-processing, we would get an order of R equals 6, but we hit a trivial case, so it is not really a useful value. So we try with another number, A equals 2. These are the probabilities, and let's say that we again make a good measurement and measure 512. Then we extract R with post-processing, but we find out it is a false positive, and we can check that because it does not verify the property of the order. So we make another measurement with the same value, and we get this other value, again a good measurement, 171. Post-processing gives us a value of R equals 6. Now we check, and all the assumptions are fine, no trivial cases are hit, and the order is even, so we can just factor n. So this is a good example of how factoring works. And this was my talk. Thank you. Any questions?
I just wanted to ask, how much of this work is you reading papers and trying to make everything work, and how many of it is just taking previously done procedures and
I mean, this entire work is me reading as much literature as I could, reading this particular implementation of the gates as I've shown. There are other implementations which I also checked, but this one was the most intuitive to understand. And then all the graphics and plots are done by me by testing the algorithms.
for example, for the case of after I see you also use ISTIC, so they
Yes.
have already an implementation for
Yeah.
this, and you compare both results or something like that.
I mean, I compare my results of the measurements I've shown for the quantum period finding probabilities, and the implementation is entirely mine, but I've compared the results to other papers on measurements. Anything else?
To implement modular addition, you use this addition in the Fourier space, but you could also do like straightforward addition, right?
Sorry?
To do the modulo M addition,
Yes.
you are doing the addition in the Fourier space.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, but you could also use the straightforward addition in the Boolean basis,
I mean,
right? So
I didn't mention it, but give me a second. The first gates were implemented in Fourier space, but then in modular product, you can see I'm already closing it by QFT, so that we are now actually computing regular addition. It is just that the other gates, they essentially work on Fourier space, but then when all the additions are combined here to construct the modular product gate, I am already closing the circuit with QFTs to make it a regular addition.
yeah, sure. So, but is this modular addition in the Fourier space more efficient than the usual addition? I don't remember.
There are other possible additions. I mentioned this particular one. There are others which might improve on qubits. Each one is different. Some are better in depth, some are better in the qubit count. There are some using exclusively Toffoli gates, mimicking classical addition. This is a particular one which just was on Fourier space, and I found it easy to implement and to understand. But again, there are several of them.
I see, because mimicking classical addition is kind of less efficient than this.
Yes. I mean, classical addition can be mimicked, but you would need several ancillary qubits, and it can be mimicked, but not really. The other implementations of quantum addition are inspired on classical addition, but do not directly mimic it.
When are you presenting the...
Sorry?
When are you presenting the...
When?
When?
Probably in September. I still haven't decided, but probably in September.
But it's done, are you planning to do more things?
No, this is, I mean, this is already enough for TFG. Yes. I mean, this is already going to be a bit hard to reduce to when writing the thesis, because it is already out of information to correctly explain.
It would be difficult to do a presentation in 15 minutes.
Yes, that is going to be a problem. Yes.
There are no more questions, so we can just thanks.
Thank you again.